Afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Richard Bradstock. I'm the founder and managing director of the RPA Group. I'm joined today by Christian Cudd, also here with the RPA Group. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Thailand, the focus on Phuket. We're going to talk a little bit about why it works, what to be careful of, where the opportunities are, and the typical sort of processes, returns on offer, all that sort of thing. Obviously, I know Thailand's quite close to your heart, isn't it, really?
It is indeed. I've lived in Thailand for quite a while, only recently moving over here to Dubai, best country on earth, in my opinion.
Thailand or Dubai?
Thailand. But I think what stands out to me is that there are some really exciting opportunities within the property market there.
Yeah.
And it's not perhaps immediately obvious to most people. So this is quite an exciting thing to be bringing to market here to the UAE
and the rest of the world.
Base and the rest of the world.
Yeah, well, I think we've probably got people online here from as far flung as West Africa, Far East, all over the world, the UK as well. So yeah, as Christian alluded to, Christian and I are both based here in Dubai. But we are very much talking about this as something that is accessible from a global standpoint. A little bit about who we are. I set up RPA almost 6 years ago now. Obviously, as mentioned just now, we are sort of headquartered here in the UAE, but we also have a presence in the UK, in Turkey, in Nigeria, with plans afoot to expand elsewhere as well. And over the last few years, we're very proud of our sort of customer-focused, service-orientated, orientated ethos, which has led to over 65% of our buyers buying a second property once they buy one from us, and over £1.3 billion worth of transactions in that time. So, moving on to Thailand. I mean, I suppose, Christian, the first question I would ask for those people on this call that perhaps maybe they've never been to Thailand, maybe they've been to Thailand, but from a sort of holiday perspective, we're obviously talking about this as much from an investment angle as anything else. So from your point of view, why Thailand? Why invest in Thailand?
Absolutely. There's a few key things that stand out to me, both from a sort of macro and micro perspective. On the sort of upper end of that, Thailand within the Asian market is pretty perfectly placed. So it's pretty much the center of Southeast Asia. So within a sort of 4 to 5 hour flight, I think we've got some statistics on this that we'll sort of show later, but about 60% of the world is accessible, of the world's population.
Yeah.
So when you look at that from a wider sort of global perspective, the accessibility is amazing.
Yeah.
Within that, from a property perspective, it's one of the only countries within Asia that will allow you to own property on a freehold basis. Which, if you're not so familiar with the freehold versus leasehold sort of aspects of property, I appreciate that we can sort of get into the weeds there a little bit. But I can sort of say confidently that it's one of the really standout opportunities within the Asian market.
Yeah.
Thailand, of course, has its challenges with certain things, as does any country at the moment. Obviously, been in the news with some of the sort of stuff going on the border and all that sort of thing. But what's really amazing about that is that it's a huge country. So there are parts of the country that are just completely isolated from all of that sort of thing. And you sort of mentioned people going there on holiday. It is one of the biggest tourism markets in the world, which from an economic perspective brings its own opportunities. And we're going to sort of get a bit more into where we can make the most of that.
I mean, I think for me, I've only been to Thailand a couple of times, but I mean, it's paradise effectively, isn't it? Beautiful, green, tropical country. Everyone knows what the beaches are like, whether you've been there or not, you've seen pictures of them. So I think the thing for me, having sort of got to know it a little bit more over the last few months, is is that actually it's also very outwardly sort of interested in that sort of foreign investment, isn't it?
100%.
And so with that in mind, there are sort of investor-friendly policies. You've already touched on the ownership, which is, you know, makes it possible to own freehold, for example, as a non-Thai, non-sort of resident investor, and all sorts of other things. But ultimately, you know, let's crack on and let's move into sort of the more localized economy and sort of opportunity that is Phuket. So Phuket's an island, right?
Phuket is an island. So the reason that we think, or I think that we think Phuket is an amazing market is that it sort of, on its geography, operates independently on pretty much the wider region in and of itself. So as you say, Phuket is an island. It's not sort of connected to mainland Thailand, but it is the largest island in the Andaman Sea, often referred to as the Pearl of the Andaman Sea.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing place, made up of various different towns and sort of villages that, as they sort of refer to it, they're not villages, but sort of little places, sort of up and down the coast. It's a little bit bigger than most people perhaps expect initially. So geographically, it's very similar size to Ibiza, for example. There's all sorts of things that you could sort of speak to it from its strengths perspective. But I think from a positioning sort of standpoint, what really stands out is the infrastructure as compared to its competitors within sort of various markets around the world. So one of the key places that people will hold up is Bali, for example.
In Indonesia,
which brings with it its own challenges from a leasehold perspective and accessibility perspective and so on. Phuket is very well managed in that sense. So infrastructure projects are coming in sort of thick and fast at the moment. There's an international airport which will connect to major destinations like Dubai, Hong Kong, Singapore, Turkey.
Yeah, I was in Turkey last week, and one of my clients flies to.
Oh, really?
Flies there regularly, direct from Istanbul. So very, very well connected.
And they've just opened up a directly to London as well. So you can see the strength of that airport, and there is an airport expansion which is sort of coming down the pipeline currently. There are also, you know, just sheer accessibility things. So they're looking at putting in a light railway system, for example. Now, if you compare that to some of the other Southeast Asian markets, which are basically very sort of underutilized or underserviced from an infrastructure perspective, that for me really makes Phuket stand out. Some really interesting sort of stats there that we can sort of see sort of coming through. But one of the things that sort of really does stand out is that Phuket appeals to that sort of slightly higher end of the sort of tourism market alongside some of the mass tourism. It really has positioned itself perfectly to be able to attract that sort of
higher net worth,
upper scale, higher net worth sort of market with things like the private jet terminal, the marinas that are sort of sat there, which makes it one of the key sailing sort of destinations in the region. And you know, within from a geography perspective, within 2 to 3 hours, you're connected to the biggest wealth centers in Asia, like Hong Kong and Singapore and so on.
I think something actually that struck me as well was obviously everybody thinks of Phuket as a tourist destination first and foremost, and obviously to some degree that's true. But there is a significant population of expats. You know, living in Phuket as well. As does, I mean, I think you told me the other day that 13 international
schools all in all. And they're all oversubscribed. So you can see that.
And more opening, right?
And more opening. And, you know, the expat families that sort of base themselves out of Phuket are doing that for a number of reasons. It's actually exactly the same reason that I found myself living in Phuket, which is if your work is taking you to the Asian wealth centers, Hong Kong, Singapore, Phuket is perfectly placed to be there. So
absolutely.
You can leave the family, go out to work for a few days, come back, you know, direct flights, super frequent every day that you can get back in.
Absolutely. 6 hours from here, I think, from
6
Dubai.
hours from Dubai.
How far from the UK? 12 hours, something like that.
Yeah, 12 hours plus from the UK. So it's a bit of a further slog, but still doable.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And I think actually that, and this is a theme just on that that we'll come back to a little bit later on, which is that, you know, as the world, it's already this global, you know, globalization is a thing, right? You know, people aren't, we're case in point, right? We're British, sitting here, living in Dubai.
Yeah.
I've lived here for almost 20 years, you know. You know, there is this sort of globalization element, which is leading to people, you know, 12 hours is nothing. 6 hours is nothing.
Yeah.
You know, people think nothing of getting on a plane now. And Phuket is perfectly positioned to take advantage of that ultimately.
And I think, just to touch on that, I think one of the real things that has stood out, particularly in the last 5 years, is this post-COVID way of people basing themselves in, you know, places that you would previously never have been able to base yourself because you've got to be in the office 5 days a week.
Yeah.
Now that has changed somewhat, all of a sudden places like Phuket have risen up as an opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. In this digital age of influencers and or just, you know, doing pretty much any job, more or less. You can do it from anywhere to some degree now these days. Yeah, so yeah, absolutely, I completely agree. But we're here to talk about the property market specifically. So obviously we can see some headlines there on the screen about, you know, the last 2 or 3 years, particularly, you know, why Phuket, you know, I suppose highlighting some of the results and some of the sort of the things that are making Phuket famous. But perhaps you'd like to touch on a couple of these.
Yeah, I mean, really the market has kicked off in a big way since COVID. That, I think, was the catalyst in recent years that has driven that market forward. Yeah. It's always been a strong property market. So if you talk to some of the expat families and so on that have been there for many, many years, they'll relay that. So there's always been a market, particularly an international market, that has really accelerated post-COVID. And the strength has come through brilliantly. And that, I think, in a large part is owing to some of the things that set it apart, as we've sort of touched on. So it's very visa friendly. So there's plenty of options for visas that you can sort of take up, particularly the elite visa programs. Not going to be sort of working in Thailand and so on. But also the sort of freehold, leasehold elements that really make it one of the most secure markets in Asia. And, you know, really sets it apart from the crowd there.
Yeah, absolutely. So some key data points. I mean, again, sort of building on what you've just said. I mean, you know, what interested me when we started looking into this in a key way, because from my perspective as the managing director of RPA, I want to make sure that we're not offering anything that our clients will either they don't want, which that's quite important, but more importantly, that is credible and good and it makes sense and has a, you know, we're with the right partners, and obviously these sort of things will come on to. But, you know, for me, it still feels cheap. It still feels early. But what's quite interesting, and obviously we're sitting here in a market in Dubai which has been seeing sort of crazy growth numbers over the last 4 or 5 years, but actually Phuket has been performing very, very strongly as well. Perhaps not, and I stress this is a good thing, not to the same levels that Dubai has, but we've still seen some solid sort of 8, 9, 10% annual growth really since COVID.
Yeah, 100%. And, you know, I think you're absolutely right, and it's good to compare it probably to Dubai, which people hold up as perhaps the market of the moment. You know, it sort of demonstrates that in some areas within Phuket, actually the market there is outpacing Dubai entirely, which is really interesting to see. So, I mean, some of the sort of stats that we're sort of holding up here, we can see that condos are more popular, condos being apartment and so on. And that is because of the freehold element, that you can own condos freehold. So that's super important to recognise. And some of the growth statistics. So if you look at sort of, you know, annual land values rising 10% a year, that will probably sort of keep up with Dubai in a lot of the sort of micro markets here. And average rental yields sort of topping out, sort of averages there at sort of 5-8%. Some locations will sort of easily surpass 10 to 11%. So there's certainly a lot to be said for that. And I think to your point about Phuket being an early market, if you compare it to places like Dubai, Miami, like-for-like comparables like Ibiza, for example, it's very cheap from a sort of monetary per square foot basis.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that we did a week or two ago. We were looking at the average price per square meter or price per square foot in places like Dubai in a branded residence compared to the sites that we're working on, we're looking at. And again, just to put that in perspective, there was advertised, I think it was the Raffles Residences on the Palm, which was a good size, 2,500 square foot, 2-bed, branded, Raffles branded apartment. And that was 17.5 or 18 million dirhams. So getting on for $6 million, $5 to $6 million. And for exactly the same price in Dubai, you can buy this mansion. In Phuket, you can buy effectively this sort of mansion villa right on the beach in a beautiful, unspoiled sort of paradise location, right?
Yeah.
And I've lived here for a long time. The Palm isn't paradise, I think it's fair to say. I love it. It's not paradise.
No, for sure.
So that sort of I've been, obviously, as I say, I've been here a long time, and I've been hearing about Thailand for quite a long time. But actually, it's still early. You can get into this sort of thing for $200,000, and you can't do that in a branded residence in many other places.
No, 100%. And I think the other thing to look at there is that it is very much a lifestyle blended investment.
Correct.
So some of the things that, we're looking specifically at Phuket here and the projects that we're going to look at specifically. What really stands out to me is that if you were to purchase one of these, not only is it giving you strong fundamentals from a capital growth perspective, strong fundamentals from a yield perspective, it does give you that true lifestyle accessibility.
Yeah.
So as you say, the Palm is one thing. Some people love it. And it's all well and good. But it's not
not to take anything away from
the Palm.
No.
But it's what it isn't is one of the most beautiful places in Asia, if not the world.
Yeah, 100%.
Places where they've filmed James Bond films, and they have sort of the world's first floating beach club, and sort of all these sorts of things that sort of come through. It's easy to overuse the word paradise, but
it's beautiful, isn't it? The greenery and everything. Yeah. So we've already sort of mentioned this briefly, but perhaps you could just explain the difference between a condominium purchase, which is freehold, and a villa purchase, which would be leasehold.
Yeah, 100%. So, there are some caveats to that. So the thing to consider is that Thailand, as we have spoken about just a moment ago, is one of the only markets in Asia that will open up freehold ownership for foreign owners. And it is still limited to some degree, and I'll say why now. But one of the things that really stands out, if you don't know the Asian market, it is nigh on impossible to own freehold property. So that's really quite key. So the way that works is within any condo building, apartment building, flats, for want of a better word, you can own 49% of basically the floor plate there as foreign ownership in a freehold structure.
Sorry, just for clarity, 49% of the apartments are sold freehold.
Exactly.
Is effectively what you're saying, rather than you're owning 49% of the apartment.
No, exactly. Yeah. So you'll have in exactly the same way as you would in many Western markets, full transparent, 100% ownership of your apartment. The other 51% of those units are only able to be sold to foreign owners under a leasehold structure. Now, a leasehold is not the worst thing in the world. In particular, Thailand is pretty good at offering long-term leases that are renewable and so on, but there are limitations to that are worth just bearing in mind. One of the key things, if you're looking at the market, to be really aware of is which developer you're working with. And if you are going to buy a leasehold property, ensuring that the structure is put in place beforehand to make sure that things don't go wrong down the line. Now, villas, which a lot of people will be sort of looking at, will predominantly be sold as leaseholds. There are some sort of fairly complex caveats to that, where you can own the land under a leasehold structure and the villa under a freehold structure. In my opinion, it's probably,
I don't think we need to.
It's too it's too convoluted. So from a sheer investment perspective, the real opportunity are freehold condos. One of the things that sort of stands out on that front is that there's such a limited amount of them, because only 49% of any properties entering the market can be sold under the freehold structures to foreign ownership, that they will create a little micro market in and amongst themselves, whereby there's a scarcity and supply and demand comes into play. The predominant availability now in Phuket is all off plan. There is a lot of development going on, particularly in certain pockets of the island. So off plan ownership or off plan purchasing rather, is quite a good way to go about it. One of the things that really stands out is the availability of mortgages to foreign buyers, which is pretty well non-existent. Very, very difficult to get an overseas mortgage in the Thai market. But what we've identified is one of our developer partners who we think gives a really good opportunity to open up the ability to leverage these purchases, which essentially sort of opens up the door to putting down less cash and benefiting from some longer term spread on that front. But fundamentally, Thailand, Phuket is a non-leveraged market. Mortgages are not a big part of the playing field there, so it's quite sort of cash heavy.
No, exactly. And again, I mean, it's certainly in the last few months talking about this, it was my initial concern was, I wasn't actually aware that you could own property freehold or on, strong renewable leases if you, in certain villa situations. But the bottom line is you can, and it's possible, and it's safe in a way that somewhere like Bali, for example, in Indonesia isn't, right?
Exactly. I think there's a lot of misinformation that comes out as it sort of comes to Bali, but the leasehold structures are really difficult to navigate. And if you get it wrong, it will go really wrong. There are places like, for example, major city markets like Ho Chi Minh City that have been drawing international investment within the Asian market recently. But again, the leasehold structuring is problematic. So it really sets itself apart.
Yeah, absolutely. And the financing, we'll come back to that in a second, because again, I think this is a good opportunity now to probably introduce our developer partner that we're working with, who are of course the Banyan Group, Banyan Tree Residences. And I think for me, whenever we're entering another market, and a quick bit of context from an RPA perspective, Christian and I, as previously mentioned, we're British. It's probably very obvious that we're British, and we have a vast amount of experience in the UK property market, and we know exactly what we're doing there, what's going on, and what to look for, and what to be wary of, and all these sorts of things. And so, my background, I've worked in property markets all over the world. I've never worked in Thailand, and so I think one of the most important things from my perspective, and certainly for our client base, our investors' perspective, is just to make sure that who we're working with is a genuinely credible, genuinely impressive company. And I think it's fair to say that with Banyan Group, that's very much the case. I mean, they're listed on Singapore and Thailand stock exchanges. They're one of the biggest hotel brands in the world, particularly one of the biggest in Asia, right?
Huge in Asia.
And alongside that are, one of the largest developers in Asia as well, and particularly obviously in Thailand and Phuket. So long story short, I think our investors are in good hands with the Banyan Group.
It's one of the things that people really don't realize is that the Banyan Group is not just a hotel group.
Yeah.
It is a major residential developer throughout Asia, but heavily in Thailand. And, it's really that kind of sort of cream of the crop market leading business that we can very confidently put our trust and faith in that, we're not going to come up against all sorts of funny, weird goings on.
Absolutely.
Down the line.
So with the Banyan Group, obviously their flagship project, which has been going on for a while now, is Laguna Phuket, right?
Absolutely.
So you want to talk us through a little bit about what this is?
Yeah, 100%. So it's quite a romantic story as Laguna has all come about. So if you are familiar with Phuket, you will know Laguna. It's really the pinnacle of the residential / 5-star hotel market on the island. Most of the coastline or an awful lot of the land behind that coastline along Bangtao Beach is owned by the Banyan Group. It was bought in the 1980s by the two owners of the Banyan Group as young, intrepid travellers into the market there. And it's built on the site of a former tin mine, which was Phuket's major economic activity for a long time, until the tin ran out. And I think everybody's probably quite thankful that it did, because we get to go and enjoy it and so on. But you can sort of see, so the whole site was built, as I say, across these sort of former, now disused tin mines. And they've spent 20 years approximately initially, sort of reinvigorating the land there, taking away the sort of after effects of the sort of industrial stuff that was going on. And the first Banyan Tree Hotel was built in the centre of Laguna. And Laguna is kind of spread around that. So all sorts of things going on, but you've got the sort of championship golf course where they have the LPGA.
It's 1,000 acres, I think, the whole thing, isn't it?
I think it might be a touch more than that.
Yeah, it's big. Yeah.
Really big. The Asian market...
There's the golf course, sorry.
Absolutely. The Asian market sort of quite resonate with it because it's sort of shaped a bit like a dragon, which sort of... people,
very loosely.
which sort of stands out to people. But you don't just have sort of Banyan Group sort of properties in there. So there are all sorts of 5-star hotel chains that sort of come in. But I think one of the things that stands out for me is that it is a master community and it is all completely managed by the Banyan Group.
Yeah.
So they won't let anything that sort of takes away from its identity into Laguna. So it is very much...
And that means it's secure as well.
100%.
Yeah.
And it's a gated, secure community in and of itself. But from a longer term perspective, it's 5-star hotels, premium residences, and really, really nice stuff that's going in there, and you're not going to get anything else that's going to sort of distract from that.
So something that stood out to me actually was when we were doing our due diligence and talking to a few other people and and all the rest, everybody kept referencing how far away their properties, other developers, were from Laguna. It's a real kind of focal point.
The closer you can be to Laguna, the more brand borrowing you can do.
And I think, and it's also worth sort of pointing out as well that within Laguna, I mean, they've got a whole load of different projects ongoing, from villas on the beach for $5-6 million, as we were talking about, comparing to Raffles 2-bed on the Palm, and all the way down to sort of smaller condominiums, apartments starting from about $200,000, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's there should be something to fit most price points.
Yeah.
The sort of lower end of the market there, what sort of appears to be sort of the cheaper end of the market, are really good quality, well-sized one-bedroom apartments.
Yeah.
And everything that you're potentially going to buy into will come with a whole raft of resort amenities, as it were. So each apartment building will have swimming pools, gyms, all that sort of stuff.
They provide shuttles to the beach.
Shuttles to the beach, private beach clubs for Laguna residents, discount memberships, and so on. That really do create that kind of master planned community.
And all of this, and this is the bit that I know you've sort of touched on this briefly on the previous slide, kind of the bit that really sold me on the development on Banyan Group, and you know, not necessarily Thailand. I was already sold on Thailand as a destination, but is the availability of lending effectively. Obviously you've already said this, that mortgages are nigh on impossible if you're a non-resident, non-Thai. But again, a testament to Banyan Group, how well capitalized they are, you know, what a good company they are, that they're able to provide effectively developer finance. So perhaps you could just talk us through a typical payment plan, but which I say typical payment plan, this is the case whether it's that villa for $5 million on the beach or a one bed at $200,000.
Yeah, absolutely. So they make their financing available across their entire portfolio. So if you look at the sort of starting point to that, so as it currently stands, there are no completed ready properties available to purchase. They're completely sold out.
Yeah.
So it is really the off-plan options that you will be looking at if you're considering this. So the way that it sort of sets itself up, so if you wanted to buy the entire property value upfront during that construction period, that's fine, and you can do that. And that's split into basically 5 payments. So an initial
that's this payment here, right?
Exactly. An initial deposit, and there are sort of, I think you can actually see in the sort of notes section, there are various sort of markers that will trigger the next stage of the deposit through construction. So
20% payments basically make 100%.
Exactly.
And a typical build period might be 2 years, for example, so like 27, 20, 28 handover. So you'd essentially, the basic sort of off-plan cash purchase model is fairly simple.
Absolutely. Yeah, really simple.
But where it gets interesting
where it gets interesting is where you come to a deferred post-handover 5-year payment plan. So what that looks like is paying in the same structure 50% of the property value pre-handover. So we can sort of see that on the right-hand side there. So 20% is your sort of first deposit, and then increments of 10% to take you up to 50% during construction and on handover. And then following that, you can split it into a number of different ways, probably the most attractive being the 5-year payment plan. Other options are 3 years and 1 year. But you can spread the total cost of the property then out over another 5 years, effectively acting a little bit like a leveraged mortgage.
Absolutely.
If you were to look in a different market.
I mean, I think the way I look at this, and what excites me sort of from a personal perspective as well, is that, you know, just using that baseline example of $200,000, you could put $100,000 in 4 payments here, 20, 10, 10, 10, over the construction of the property, which, as we just said, might be the next 2 years. And then you've got a further 5 years to make the next 50% with these quarterly payments. Obviously, there is a 7% interest rate, but given that you have a completed asset at that point and income being generated off that, you know, it's in 8 years, 7 or 8 years, you will have an asset that you will have effectively put maybe a touch just over 50% in once you factor in the interest and stuff, but it's fully paid off. It's your asset. It's cheap. It's in a beautiful place in a market that is growing. That's actually very doable for a lot of people.
Yeah, 100%.
And that, I think that's the really, really interesting thing here.
I think particularly as part of a wider portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you've got UK property, UAE property, whatever it may be, you may have generated quite a lot of equity off that.
Yeah.
Something like this could be a really good thing to put that
absolutely
towards.
Yeah, absolutely. So another question, who buys there?
Yeah, so I mean, we touched on it earlier, but what I think really sort of stands out within Laguna itself and the wider Bangtao market, which is the village that Laguna sits within, is that it's a very expat heavy marketplace. So the further south on the sort of different parts of the island is where you run into sort of your slightly more sort of mass tourism markets and so on. Places like Patong with, the wild, crazy kind of bars and all that sort of thing going on. Bangtao is very sort of a bit of an enclave. It follows the geography of the island there, but it's much quieter, much more refined.
Middle class.
Very middle class kind of stuff going on. And what really sort of struck me, sort of spending time there, was most of the people that you meet will be either Western retirees or Western expat families.
Yeah.
So people living in Hong Kong and Singapore, or were living in Hong Kong and Singapore, that are sort of splitting their time and so on. And I think within Laguna, what we sort of can see is that the makeup of ownership is about 60% international, roughly, and 40% domestic being Thais. And again, what's sort of quite striking is that the very sort of wealthy Thai market, you see Laguna as a proper, it's the big second home sort of ownership place and weekend place.
And then the other thing I was quite interested to see is that inevitably, the Far East, Asia, China, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, obviously Thailand itself account for a significant proportion of it.
Yeah.
But the UK, for example, have been some of the biggest buyers of Thai property over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, 100%.
Whereas the rest of the world, I suppose as you get further away from Thailand, and maybe people are thinking about it less from a holiday destination point of view, harder to get to it. It hasn't yet been quite discovered to the same level. But yeah, it's a very eclectic mix of people who buy there, clearly.
What I think is quite interesting on that front is, some of those UK buyer statistics will be sort of accounted for as they've gone to Hong Kong, as an example, done their 20 years there or whatever, started to raise a family, and now they're looking for that slightly sort of quieter pace of life.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't want to spend too long on this because I'm aware we've been talking for quite a while, and there's a couple of things we still want to get through. But just as an example, and I would stress here again that we're highlighting a particular property here, Asta Laguna Lake Residences. One of the services that we as RPA offer is, we want to sit down with you, excuse me, we want to understand what you're looking for, what you're trying to achieve, your budgets, all these sorts of things. It might be that this particular property isn't right. It might be that maybe you want one of the villas. It might be that you want one of the, this is a sort of mid-range option, isn't it, within the apartment condominium market?
It is, but it's quite exciting. So it sits within the sort of head of the dragon, as it were, within Laguna, which they're expanding out because previously that has just been sort of a forested area around the lakes that are within the community boundaries, and they're making the most of some of that land now. So it really does sort of become quite striking where you're slightly further away from the beach here, but actually I think that will be quite interesting to see how many sort of expat families and so on start to move up that sort of way. But there's a really incredible kind of master planned environment that they're putting in. So there will be sort of rainforest sort of zones, parks, as it were, and really making the most of the sort of natural elements that are within the land.
And within, obviously, I think one of the questions I get asked every time when talking about Thailand is it on the beach?
Yeah.
This isn't on the beach, but with the shuttle services, I mean, you're 5 minutes.
You can walk it in 15 minutes.
It's
super straightforward.
Obviously, we've talked about the payment plan. Here's a few more images. I think
and just to highlight, if you look at, for example, you've got the rooftop pools and that sort of thing, which are great in and of themselves. But then if you look at, you really aren't far from the beach, despite it being sort of further back in the community.
And so I think if I just go back a slide, if I can, 11 million baht US dollars. We're talking about 350,000 US dollars
in that sort of region. Conversion.
So with that, effectively $70,000 would get you into this. Stage payments, another 35, and then 50%
spread over 5
years.
A lot like a mortgage, just on a shorter time frame.
Yeah, exactly. So and again, as I stress, that if you sort of viewing this, you are interested to hear a little bit more, maybe this one's a bit too expensive, maybe you'd like to spend a bit more money than this, maybe you'd like to look at villas as opposed to condominiums, then we're here to help you and discuss that further. Now, this is, again, really just to break it down. So if we go from the top, this is a typical 2-bedroom apartment, right? 1702.
Sort of mid-range within after there. So about just a touch over 20 million Thai baht.
So this is more like 600,000 US dollars.
Yeah, in that sort of region.
Yeah. And again, the same payment plan applies. We've got the 50% developer finance in here, and we're using an occupancy rate of 70%. Now, just on that point, before we go any further, we should probably explain that this is run through something called Banyan Living.
Yeah.
On a sort of short lets.
So one of the things,
hotel style basis.
One of the challenges with any kind of international property investment that you're looking at making is, how do you manage it?
Yeah.
Do you rent it out? Who's going to do that for you? Who's going to look after it? So again, one of the strengths of sort of partnering with Banyan Group is that they're a world-class hospitality service, so they really understand this sort of thing. But they have their own sort of rental and management platform for the residents of Laguna as well. So you can hand your property straight over to the professionals that really understand the market, how to go about it, how to look after it, how to ensure that maintenance is being done in a timely manner, and so on. And sort of rest easy on that front. They will charge for that service,
of course.
It's not sort of built into the purchase price or anything like that.
And actually, that is factored in here.
Yeah.
So then maybe just in the interest of sort of moving along. So essentially, the way this works is a purchase price of 20.5 million. Oh, sorry about that. With a purchase price of 20.5 million Thai baht. There's 100,000 baht, which is about 3,000 US dollars, as your sort of reservation holding deposit, if you like, which is deducted against the purchase price. You've got your 20% payment, followed by 3 10% payments as the build is complete. Developer finance here of 10 million, which, assuming the 7% interest in a 5-year payment, essentially means quarterly payments of 608,000 Thai baht, which sounds like a lot of money, but bear in mind this is a 600,000 US dollar property. Actually, it isn't all that much. 18,500 US dollars as a payment on a quarterly basis. Now, obviously, through the Banyan Living system you were just discussing, using an occupancy rate of 70% and the typical income, we're talking about a gross income that is actually higher than those quarterly payments.
Yeah. So just to touch on some of those figures there. So 70% occupancy, is quite a good sort of number to be using, because that, give or take 1% or 2%, is actually what is being achieved across the Laguna estate at the moment within any of the Banyan projects. And that is sort of made up of short-term rentals and 3 months at a time or a week at a time or whatever it may be. So there can be sort of, some good turnover there. But as we say, Banyan will manage all of that for you. So that's quite handy. And then as you sort of split the costs up, so part of the percentage cost that will sort of go towards that is for that sort of management service. Another part of it included in these figures is the platform costs. So things like Verbo, Booking.com, etc. Banyan will also manage all of the advertising for the property there and put it out on all those platforms. So that 22% figure is the sort of aggregated average across all the platforms that they might be using and so on.
And so once you then break that down, so you remove the 22%. So in this example, and obviously at today's rates, what this does mean is that you are in ever so slight a deficit position. So just to put that in context, I mean, less than $8,000 a year, I suppose, that you would have to effectively put in to cover that financing cost. But I think that is an incredibly small price to pay for a property that in 7-8 years' time you will own 100%. So this is the option. The opportunity is to put the 50% in staggered payments over the build, and to then effectively have to put in, less than $2,000 a quarter for the rest of the time you have a debt on that property, which in 5 years' time will no longer be there.
Well, this is it, and I think,
and that's without any inflation and price, rental price, room nightly sort of rent prices or anything like that.
And your rate's not going to change, so you can look at that from a management perspective.
It's fixed.
And I think if you look at that on the basis of, as you say, 5 years, it's like a very short mortgage. You're basically utilising it to make the most of that leverage, and you're essentially paying $1,687 a quarter to reclaim 300 or so.
It's amazing. Sense. It is amazing. And obviously what we can do again is sort of produce versions of this if you wanted to look at, as I say, less expensive, more expensive units, different, maybe only the 3-year payment plan, or maybe you want to just do it all in cash. But we're here ultimately to help and advise and sort of take you through that. And I think we are thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to join us today. Video will be on YouTube and so on as well if you'd like to sort of have another look at it afterwards. But what I'd like to stress about what we're here to do is we want to provide you a fully advisory service, and not just from a Thai property point of view, but from an international point of view. We are active in the UK, in Germany, the UAE, in Thailand. There's probably not many markets that if you wanted to ask us about that we couldn't give you an opinion on. I think ultimately this is what we're here for. And further to that, I think to stress again, partnered with a company like Banyan Group, it just means that we as salespeople and the company that are sort of obviously advising you to look at these things, but also you, most importantly, as the owners of these properties, can actually just, sleep easy in your beds, right? Because it's a good property in a fantastic location with very strong investment fundamentals. And I think, again, just really, I suppose, to round off on that point is, whereas Thailand has been, and certainly in the last 3 or 4 years, Phuket's been very present in sort of international property circles, right? But we are still early. We're still cheap. And if there's one thing, having spent 20 years working in global property markets around the world, in 10 years' time, in 15, 20 years' time, this will be significantly more expensive. And there will probably be conversations where, where Thailand will be very much a mainstream thing and the prices will be up here and we'll be thinking we should have done this 20 years ago.
And I think in my opinion, we're just on the cusp of that now. People are really getting to know Thailand. They're getting to know Phuket in particular as a major market from a property perspective.
Yeah.
The expat families that maybe sort of previously would have, we'll rent for a few months, see how we go. Yeah. They're buying now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there is plenty of capital coming into the market there.
Yeah. And that's, we're sitting in the UAE here in Dubai, which not that long ago, and it still is sometimes talked about as an emerging market. Mm-hmm. I think Dubai's emerged. Yeah. If you're looking for the next sort of cheap but exciting long-term growth potential, and you've, as you said earlier, maybe you've bought property in Dubai and Abu Dhabi, maybe you've bought property in the UAE, in the UK, other sort of the US, other sort of developed markets, and you're looking for something a bit different, then this, Thailand could very much be that option.
And I can't stress strongly enough I think it's easy for us as sort of consultants with our clients that, we really look at the facts and figures and percentages and so on, and we get sort of bogged down in that. Yeah. But really where Phuket in particular stands out in comparison to pretty much anywhere else is the lifestyle that it's going to potentially bring you to use these properties in their downtime or whatever.
As well as get a return off them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you very much for joining us. I've got a couple of questions here, but we have been waffling on. So if you're still with us, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Got a couple of quick questions. Branded residences. First of all, so these are come in from people on the call, so thank you very much. But branded residences, can you just, if you can, briefly explain the advantage of buying a branded residence over your average condominium unit 5 minutes away down the road in Phuket?
So, I mean, the concept of a branded residence has really exploded in the last 5 years or so. Yeah. Most prevalent throughout here in the UAE and Asia. Really what the strength of it that really stands out is that if you are in a market that is internationally focused, much like here in Dubai or Phuket or wherever, all of a sudden the residence association with whatever brand it may be gives that international buyer the immediate confidence that I know what this property is and I know that I can rely on it.
I read somewhere that brand residences typically go for 25-30% more than your equivalent property, because if Banyan Tree are putting their name to it, it has to be a certain quality, right? Absolutely. It has to be a certain level of finishing. It has to be looked after and maintained. And on top of all those other bits you've discussed, right? The access and to cheaper memberships, to shuttle buses to the beach, to whatever it might be.
Laguna in and of itself is a brand.
Yeah.
So people in Phuket recognise that. People in Thailand recognise that. All across Asia they recognise that. Within Laguna there are various kind of brandings, such as the Lakelands brand and so on. But some of these properties are Banyan Tree residences. Yeah. And for one of the biggest hotel chains on the planet to put those up and say, here's our stamp on this.
Yeah. It's big.
Yeah, they have to be able to rely on that from a long-term perspective.
Absolutely. I think we've got a question here about mortgages, but we've already covered that. There are no mortgages. It's the payment plan. Here's a good one. Can we visit it?
Yes.
So, and they would encourage you to visit it.
Absolutely encouraged to visit. One of the sort of quite interesting sort of statistics that Banyan Tree give us is that 70% of the people that have been exploring these opportunities that go on to visit the site ultimately purchase property.
Yeah.
Which is quite telling in and of itself.
Yeah.
But they're very good at accommodating that. I think it's part of the Thai hospitality thing that they want to welcome everybody to go down there. So the way that they sort of best go about that is if you're considering a unit and you put a reservation deposit down, they will put you up in accommodation in Laguna for a few nights to go and visit the site, visit the show suites, see the show homes and so on, really get familiar with Laguna itself. And they'll give you that opportunity to really go and assess it.
Yeah, which is, don't get that in the UK.
You don't.
Brilliant. Well, look, Christian, thank you very much for your time. I think at this point, we will stop there. I think we've been going for about 50 minutes. So thank you very much to everybody that joined us. We would very much encourage you to get in touch. We'd love to answer some more questions in detail, go through everything that you'd like to talk about within this, and indeed, whether it's if you're thinking about property investment generally, and you're thinking, well, maybe Thailand, or maybe the UAE, or maybe UK, or and you just want to sort of chat about options. That's, again, we're here, and we would encourage you to get in touch. So thank you very much, and we look forward to hearing from you soon. Cheers.